Hello. I can't imagine why it would matter to you, but we've had quite a few technical problems on our side here and life challenges, so it's been a long time since I've made one of these recordings for you. And for questionable reasons, I've decided to sort of tell my life story. So if you listen to any of our programming, you'll have some idea of why I'm as strange as I may be. Um, it did occur to me that my children have no idea how I came to exist, and it's a little bit of an odd story. There's no logical reason why my parents ever should have met, much less fallen in love or married or had a child. They were in completely different lifestyles and so on and so forth. But life is very unpredictable. So, um, well, actually, I learned a little. My father never talked about his childhood. My mother never talked about hers. Years after she passed away, I learned she'd been raised quite traditionally Jewish, right-wing Jewish. She never thought that was worth bringing up, apparently. And my father was equally reticent, and he and I only spent a couple of years together. But when my father died, my mother took care of everything, and when she died, she had pretty much organized everything she wanted to happen at her burial service and so on. But basically, I'm in Hollywood and she's in Helena, Montana, so I have to go through her half of her duplex and prepare it to get rented and so on because we had economic pressures on us in those days. And so when I went through it, I happened to open up the freezer, and in the freezer is a Bible. I never saw this book when I was growing up. Uh, I don't believe religion ever came up in my childhood, and so I was not raised in any organized religion, for which I'm eternally grateful. So in the book, there were some papers which included some family history. And the most unique one, I think, was this one. Now, we'll have to find out if I can give you a close-up because it's an old piece of yellow scratch paper and it's written in pencil, and it says at the top that it's a family record. And so one of my father's sisters, I believe, wrote this out. It's clearly a woman's handwriting from a century ago when, whatever you call it, women's handwriting was really pretty. And I'm able to read it. And it starts out about my grandparents, my father's parents. Harvey A. Jester and Carrie A. Cooper were united in marriage February 18th, 1885 at Aberdeen, South Dakota. Now, I do know that Harvey was like 36 and Carrie was like 20. And he was kind of a big, I think, alcoholic brute, and she was a 100-pound tiny woman. They'd both been born in Illinois, and how they ended up in Aberdeen, South Dakota when she was 20 and he was 36, I have no idea. But there they were, and somehow they met and they got married. And over the next years, they had 12 children, 8 boys and 4 girls. And my father was the next to the last one born. He was the 11th out of the 12. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about their first child's name was Glenn, and he was born in Westport, South Dakota, December 8, 1885. That's roughly 20 years after the Civil War. Now, Harvey was born in Vermilion, Illinois in 1849, at least 11 years before the Civil War. And Carrie was born in Essex, Illinois in 1865, a few months after the Civil War ended. So anyway, the first child was Glenn, born in 1885, and they were married in 1885 in February, and Glenn was born in December, 10 months after they got married. The second child was Roy. He was still in Westport, South Dakota, 1887, 2 years younger than his older brother. And Pansy, the first daughter, I knew Pansy, 1888, Lloyd, 1890, and Daisy, 1891. Now, this all took place there in about 6 years, these first 5 children. And then, somewhere before the next child was born, they moved. Now, I don't know if they had a homestead in South Dakota, but moving from South Dakota, they went to Oklahoma. And that's a long ways. That's from a little closer to the Canadian border to the middle of America. And I don't know how long it took them or what pulled the wagon or how they managed, but for this like 26-year-old woman with 5 kids to move from South Dakota to Oklahoma in a wagon must have been a long, hard journey. And so they got to Oklahoma, and the 6th child, another boy, Harry Jr., was born in 1894. The 7th child was James. He was 1896. Then there was Laura, and I knew Laura better than any of my, well, better than any of my father's sisters. She was born in 1898, and she's going to play a role here in a minute. And John in 1901, and Clara, the last daughter, in 1903. And then my father was born in 1905. And he had a younger brother, Frank, born in 1909. So what happened is the 4th child, Lloyd, died when he was 2 months old. And the 6th and 9th children, Harry Jr. and John, both died when they were 6. So what was left was 4 girls and 5 boys, 9 kids. While I'm giving you dates that probably don't matter, my grandfather, Harvey, died in 1927. He was 78, and his wife, Carrie, died in 1929. She was 64. And they were both buried by Laura. Laura ended up taking over the whole family raising, and she may have written this. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that was Pansy, or one of the earlier daughters, that wrote that. Okay, so finding that was amazing to me. I think that my grandfather was a mean redneck, and I think he beat Carrie, and I think he beat the children, and they were always hungry. It was a very hard scrabble life, that whole homestead deal. And my father left at the earliest possible point, possibly when he was about 16. He went to Sheridan, Wyoming, where his older sister Laura was. She had married Walt, he was the train operator, the steam engineer operator of the biggest steam engines in the West. And no man had a higher position in life. The guy who pulled these long trains safely in these giant steam engines was at least more important than the local mayor or the town banker or the doctor. So his name was Walt Weir, and Laura, my father's sister, married him. And let's see, she was, well, I'm really sorry to be dependent on these notes, but Laura was born in 1898 and my father in 1905. So she was 7 years older. So when he was 16, if he left and went to her, she was like 23. And somewhere in there, she had a couple kids, a boy and a girl. And I knew them, Jack and Betty. And Jack, I think, took me in my first airplane ride when I was maybe 5, 6 years old. And I'll never, ever forget it. Tiny little Piper Cub, and it was a very tiny engine, and you were just sure it was never going to get off the ground, and it barely did. Anyway, I think very hard scrabble life. And so because I don't know if this is a great-granddaughter watching this or who you are. So there were a couple of things that had happened in America that mattered here to this family. And so I'm going to try and make these relatively short. Hannah says shorter is better. So why don't we stop here and then we'll do part 2. And I'll try and, okay.